It appeared that many people were investing into what we considered a bit misleading, which is a savings account that was pitched as safer than a bank.
Hi everyone, what's going on? Carlos here, a normal guy trying to make wealth for my family. If you've been following the Celsius situation, you've probably already heard about Simon Dixon. His company owns 5% of Celsius shares, and Simon himself is a depositor in Celsius with tens of millions of dollars in assets. Simon has been in the crypto space for over 10 years, and over the past few weeks, and especially over the past few days, he's been very active and very vocal on Twitter, on YouTube, in all kinds of social media, trying to find a solution for Celsius' problems. Because he's been so active and so vocal and perhaps a little bit aggressive, he's been targeted by many people who are accusing him of FUD. My opinion right now is that Simon has the best intentions and the best know-how to try to find ingenious solutions so that the depositors will have access to their funds again. Yesterday, Simon spoke for over 1 hour in his YouTube channel, and then he went to Twitter Space and he did a AMA with the community. So what I'm doing in this video is show you the highlights of his speech and the highlights of his AMA, in case you don't have time to watch everything. I have tried to compile it into the shortest possible video, making sure that all the important information is still there. Simon stated that in order to get involved with the recovery directly, he's gonna have to sign NDAs and go silent. So this might be the last opportunity to get inside information from Simon Dixon. Stay tuned and watch until the end.
Over time, the model slowly seemed like it started to change. And that was because Celsius grew so fast. So many people were interested in this. It appeared that many people were investing into what we considered a bit misleading, which is a savings account that was pitched as safer than a bank. So I've looked back at some of those videos now. I wasn't following along with all of this the way that this was marketed. And then there was lots of affiliate schemes as well when you received tokens. And then it seemed like the guarantees were being made in terms of the safety of the business based upon a balance sheet that had lots of tokens, and those tokens are volatile. And it appeared that then other people come along, and it seemed like retail were over collateralized, and then there was deals with hedge funds where they were under collateralized. And so the risk profile seemed to change very significantly. And so from our perspective, and then we started to hear that there were 6 different ways of generating yield. That's a deviation from the peer-to-peer model. If there's 6 different ways of generating yield, you now seem to be investing in the ability for a fund manager to invest those funds effectively, which would then move you into what we do at Bank to the Future, which is securities laws. And securities are marketed very differently. There's lots of restrictions on how they're marketed. You have to have lots of transparency, lots of disclosure, suitability testing, and the things that really stop people putting their life savings and understanding that they should only put a percentage of money they can afford to lose, and they have the information to know what they're investing in. This is what, as more recently, as I started to dig into these things, that seemed to be more and more people were contacting me, and they put their entire life savings. They were taking money out of a bank thinking that they were investing into a low risk savings account rather than a high risk security. And then it turns out that the collateral behind that started to change as well. There was lots of tokens, and then there was algorithmic stable coins, things that are at a significantly higher risk profile than the original dollar-backed stable coins or Bitcoin, or going a little bit further down the risk curve with things like Ethereum. So it looked like this model was getting riskier and riskier and riskier. There was an announcement that Celsius was doing their Series B. We started to enter into an agreement, a settlement agreement around that oversight, and we started to conduct due diligence. And this process went on for months, and we never quite got the disclosures that we were asked for. We also gave them a deadline to provide the documentation. And we told them that there were some regulatory changes that were coming up. And suddenly on an AMA, we got, a massive amount of tweets from people that were saying, we've got regulatory issues at Bank to the Future. We're like, what the hell's going on here? And Alex threw us under the bus. And because the due diligence hadn't been provided, seemed to, put it on our fault. But we started to realize that there's a bit of a short gun here. There's somebody that seems to be firing off the line. And so we requested more information. We weren't quite getting all the information that we wanted in order to make this assessment, begin the Series B. And then the round was announced as closed, but we hadn't completed our part. So we started to ask further about the financials, the regulatory, and then we were finding out that there were regulatory challenges. Now, when we realized that the collateral was actually a couple of things that were, and it was going further and further. Why? Because this company grew fast and lots of people were demanding more and more yield. In order to generate that yield, they must have been trying to chase their tail and find as many places to generate that yield. And I think that this is when we started to see some of the complications that happened as it went public. And so the first one was obviously the Luna situation. Celsius, it turns out, had some exposure to that. Not aware of the full details, asked for those details, and some power plays happened, and it looked like there were several companies that were exposed to that position. Celsius allegedly came out and said that they weren't exposed, so they pulled out the money to protect. Prior to that, there were announcements of certain hacks, certain situations, and it looked like it was moving from a high-risk security to there potentially being some holes as more of these announcements were announced. So we kept asking for information. It turns out that there seemed to be some uncollateralized loans from many of the lending platforms exposed to one particular hedge fund that was exposed to this token and this stable coin that got completely wiped out. And so this is when we realized how interconnected the entire market had become, because really this yield was all being generated from what looked like unsecured loans from some major counterparties, and it started to have a cascading effect across the industry. And as more and more of it started to unwind, it started to look like there was a lot of mistruths around, things that might be perceived as true, like we got $2 billion, $750 million funding round, and maybe a lot of that was sell tokens, which crashed as this started to go through. The moral of the story is that it turns out that if you had invested in a DeFi fund, then fair enough. You were taking those risks. You would have been disclosed. There would have been documentation to help you understand the risks. You would have had to do suitability tests and everything you have to do when it is a security. People did not understand the risks of some of these things, and people were taking their life savings because they were told that this is as good as a savings account. And we were involved in structuring a free market solution that allowed Bitfinex to start a recovery plan within 2 weeks. I wanted to immediately give that plan to the Celsius team. So I contacted Alex. I told him about the plan. I told him how it worked. And I warned him, you have to be really quick, really decisive, communicate effectively. Because if you don't communicate effectively and you don't act decisively, then you end up with all sorts of rumors and all sorts of FUD and all sorts of concerns. That can cascade into a disaster. So he immediately just put me off to Citibank. And I knew that at that stage, I started to get concerned because I knew that traditional finance wouldn't move at the pace that is required in order to make this effective. So instead, we offered that we could support them in putting together a structure. But look up Bitfinex hack recovery. There's two things that really made it work: effective communication and complete transparency of the financial situation. This is when we started to realize that this was going longer because we started to see BlockFi, who put together a recovery plan, because they transparently disclosed the financial position to investors that had the level of sophistication and the backing and resources in order to put together that recovery plan. We then started to see some of the other companies, some of the hedge funds just blew up for no recovery. And we started to see companies that would disclose their financial position, move into Chapter 11, and then once you have the financial information, you can then put together an effective recovery plan where you can convert either some of that debt to equity, or you could do something like a bit more innovative where you launch either a stablecoin or a security token. And we've had many experiences with different structures that would make that work in order to ensure that you can protect the brand of the company, recover from that. But you have to fess up, you have to put your hands up, and you have to disclose the financial position, communicate it effectively, and then put together a decisive plan. As we saw that this wasn't happening, we started to get deeper and deeper concerns. So at that stage, I took to Twitter, and you can go back through the Twitter archives, and started to let people know that there is effective recovery plans, and there are things that can be done. And the worst situation is if we as an industry allow this to get into what happened to Mt. Gox in the early days. We had to all lobby in order to ensure that the Bitcoin wasn't sold as a result of that disaster and it wasn't put into bankruptcy. Unfortunately, all of the lobbying effort meant that they kept that Bitcoin, they gave it a chance, and it came out of bankruptcy because that Bitcoin was worth a lot. Now, the challenge was there were lawsuits absolutely everywhere, and it went on for years and years and years because those lawsuits, and it wasn't done under Chapter 11, it was done under Japanese law. There are other jurisdictions. So Celsius is a UK company with a US subsidiary. UK bankruptcy law would be very unfavorable. And then I started to realize that this is systemically risky. If we do not solve this, then traditional finance will just put in, mass liquidations. It could even move to something like Chapter 7, and then everyone would get the worst result as well. So we put together the Depositors First campaign, letting people know that wherever this goes, we're going to put together effective plans. We was moving at 1,000 miles per hour. And we followed the strategies. We told them that we don't believe there's a future for this company unless depositors get a good result. If depositors get a good result, there could be a future for Celsius shares. And if there's a future for Celsius shares, then they may be able to restructure the token to comply and restructure the company to comply, given that we believe that this was going to be a securities business, or it may have even come into a lending or banking business based upon the risks and some of the over-collateralized and collateralized models. Unfortunately, those finances were not provided. So we put together a big syndicate of investors that had very deep pockets, including myself, willing to put some more skin in the game, which then allowed other people to be willing to put a lot more skin in the game as well. But it required disclosure of the financials, and that disclosure was not being done. And then we started to see moves in order to obfuscate some of the financials by trying to say, here's a mining business, here's a custody business, and the rest of it we're not saying. And I started to get a bit more aggressive because I started to believe that actually the existing board and the existing management, if they continue down this path, are never going to be able to operate a regulated business. There was not going to be a fast way of getting this business regulated. So I started to speak to other people that had the licenses, other businesses that were working quietly in the background to secure those licenses, and put together a plan, last resort, that it looks like the actions that Celsius are taking right now is that the trust in the brand's going to go, lawsuits are going to come flying through, and it looks like there is some very challenging times ahead for the board members based upon the actions that they were taking. And then you just started to see the destruction of a brand, the destruction of trust, and then more and more red flags started to come through. So at that stage, I realized that we had switched to another effective plan. We had the backers, we had the strategy, and we had the restructuring plan. And at that stage, we realized we believe that this brand cannot recover. and these board members cannot recover. I was invited at this stage to join the board. And at that stage, I started to question the ethics and integrity, started to get a bit more vocal, because I'm a director of a regulated company. That would destroy my business if I was caught up in something like this. And the NDAs that were being asked to solve, I believe, was just ways of obfuscating. And then restructuring was happening that started to deeply concern me. So I started to realize that in order to maintain my depositors first promise, that I needed to do something that is very against my nature. I started to realize that we were in a choice right now between protecting a board member from unearthing actions that I believe could lead to really, really serious consequences versus depositors. And so at that stage, everyone started having different interests. We had people that owned tokens. They were trying to short the tokens, asked me to short the tokens. And I was just disclosing everything, saying, I'm not going to touch any tokens. I'm not going to move any funds. This will go to discovery. There's going to be all sorts of stuff. And every single thing is going to be unearthed in this, the way that this is going and the direction this is going. I've got to stay true to my ethics. I've got to stay true to my integrity. And so I just literally went into a frenzy of disclosure, but here's what we need to do. Disclosure, but here's what we need to do. Started to get my reputation attacked. More and more people were following me. And so suddenly I just found myself in this situation. I wasn't sleeping. I was on call after call after call. I spoke to everybody in the industry. I was putting together effective plans, and I knew where this was going. We had to be 10,000 steps ahead, because the way that this was going is it was the only way to get the finances was this was going to be moved into Chapter 11. And I wanted to be prepared for not having the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is that it moves into Chapter 11. They get conservative. They sell all your crypto. Restructuring doesn't happen because there is no future for the company. It's not compliant. It doesn't have the licenses. And it, cascades and gets worse and worse and worse. So at that stage, I had to move, to the final stage, which is the only way is to put together an effective recovery plan for depositors. The only way that they have a future is if there is a new brand, new licenses, new regulations, and a very fast future in order to come out, because you can't restructure and use equity to restructure when the equity is worthless. And then you moved into forced liquidations and all of the disaster. And guess what? That would then cascade all of the issues. Celsius behind the scenes were trying to get to the point where they knew their financial position. Obviously, everyone talks about blockchains, but I also know that there's contracts that happen, market manipulation that happen, obfuscation of tracks, and all sorts of things that I knew this was going to get messier and messier and messier. And therefore, a new entity was going to need to be created. So I started putting together all my contacts, putting together the funding, and getting ready for the worst case scenario, which led to deeper and deeper attacks. So that really brings us to the moment that we are in right now. I started getting very, very criticized for creating FUD and stuff, because I was trying to warn people from my experience of being involved in the industry for over a decade and getting steps and steps ahead. And I knew that community effort and community lobbying was going to be need in order to get this. And I was also knew that deep pockets were going to be needed in order to win back trust. But I do believe that there is a really, really interesting future that I am under NDAs with lots of different players, trying to make sure that once we have depositors, there needs to be a way, and this is where we lead to the bail-in conversation, that normally during these restructures, debts get replaced with equity if you don't do a government bailout or something like that. The Lehman situation, Lehman's went down because it didn't have a government bailout and it was too complicated to do a bail-in. But certain parts of the business were restructured, the assets went down, it created a cascading effect. I wanted to avoid that in this market, because I knew that people were making bets that the market wouldn't go down further, and that would create more cascading liquidations. And the worst case scenario for everyone's where they only end up with a tiny amount of deposit left. no future of equity, and a token that is at best an illegal security, and that token would get delisted from all exchanges, and that would wipe out many people that had all of their funds in Cell. That is exactly what I've been trying to avoid. And so those people that are in a situation right now where they can't even disclose to their partners or their fathers that they are scared that the life savings of those people have been put into stable coins. We are working, and I will work as hard as I can until my voice doesn't work anymore and I'm coughing like crazy day and night.
My opinion here, based on what Simon has said, is that people from Celsius are trying to avoid going to prison, trying to avoid ruining their life at the cost of you and I not get our deposits back. I'm not saying that Simon is an angel. Mashinsky was a great salesman and I actually believed him. And maybe I'm being a fool again for believing Simon Dixon. But that's how I feel right now. I feel that Simon is genuine and he has obviously his interests, but also our best interests in mind. To show your appreciation for the time I have spent compiling the highlights of what Simon has said, you can smash up the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care guys, bye bye.